Welcome to Impolite MTG,
where we're going to talk about Magic the Gathering.
and we're not always going to be nice about it.
I'm 8.5 Daves.
And I'm Chris Tarl, the mustache herder. Hey, so do you recall talking about our Commander pet peeves a while ago?
Yeah, what about it?
I really think we should go in more depth with one of the topics we were discussing there.
Yeah, let's talk about threat assessment and why you suck at it.
Damn it, Dave, I was going to say that. And don't forget, we also suck at it.
Hey, speak for yourself, motherfucker. I'm great at threat assessment. I'm a Simic player. That means I dirtle and I dirtle and I dirtle until it's time to kill everyone. And that means I've got to stay alive that whole time. How dare you?
Yeah, anyways, so unlike Fight Club, the first rule of threat assessment is you kind of have to talk about threat assessment.
Agreed.
So, do you want to give a definition for what threat assessment actually is for the new players in the audience?
Yeah, let's go over that so if anybody's new to Commander, you can kind of understand what threat assessment is. So threat assessment is the act of continually updating your understanding of the state of the game, whether that is the board state, cards in hand, or other factors like graveyard size or the specific contents of it. The importance of threat assessment cannot be understated, as it can be the difference between knowing when to position yourself for power plays or to hold back and deal with threats to your ability to win the game.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. And I think we should start by, kind of discussing what happens before the game. The scene threats of the game, starting with the commander. And a few examples: Narset Enlightened Master, Alenda the Dust Rose, the First Sliver, Calamex the Stormsire. You can kind of pick up on what the general strategy is, what popular archetypes are going to be used.
And based on the colors of the commander, that can also give you some different information.
Yeah, it'll typically show, like, in a blue deck, it'll have counter spells. In a black deck, it might have a lot of really good spot removal.
In a white deck, you're going to have board wipes.
Oh, big time. And then green deck, the threat is ramped. They're coming at you hard and fast.
Yeah, they're going to be pumping out a lot of stuff quicker than your ability to maybe even deal with it.
This is kind of where you have to start evaluating the threat early on. Which colors are most scary to you? I see a black-white deck like Alenda, and I'm not too concerned about ramp. They can get big splashy ramp effects in there, sure, but my concern for ramp would be, Calamex the Stormsire or the First Sliver. They're going hard for it. They want to be able to play their commander as early as possible.
Yeah.
And cause a lot of damage.
Exactly. And then once you get past assessing the commander, you get into the actual permanents that might show up on the board. This is things like creatures, big giant creatures like Blightsteel Colossi, or...
It could be a wide board like a token deck with Reese the Redeemed at the helm of it.
Yeah, if you're looking at a Reese deck, you're going to look at a lot of little weenie dudes that can get big in a hurry.
But also you got to look at the commanders too when they're attacking in, because, like, commander damage is a real threat in this format, and...
Yeah, exactly.
That can come up very easily.
Yeah, you definitely want to look at people's commanders as well and determine, like, is this a little weenie commander that I don't got to deal with, or is it something like my Aurelia, the War Leader, where I'm going to be hitting you twice with this broad, and that commander damage is going to stack up.
Really quickly. But the other thing is the commander a part of a combo? And this is the other thing you got to watch for on the board, is combo pieces and synergy pieces.
Exactly. A Sensei's Divining Top would look pretty innocuous for the most part until you see a Bolus of Citadel or a Aetherflux Reservoir hit the field, and then you realize that the top is part of a combo, and you're like, uh-oh, gotta deal with that.
Oh, for sure. And sometimes you might not get a chance to deal with that combo, and it'll just go off, and kind of everybody's fault in that case. Like, you kind of assess a threat too late to actually solve the problem.
Yeah, if you sleep on certain threats, or, the other thing is if you are holding a grudge or whatever and you don't properly assess, these permanents on the board, you go after one player because, they killed you last game. Yeah, that's entirely on you.
Speaking of, holding grudges, you also have cards that shut down the strategy on the table. So you graveyard hate effects like Leyland of the Void and Rest in Peace. Stacks cards. They're going to shut down a lot of decks really, really quickly. Like, we've talked a lot about stacks on this channel. We're not going to go too far into those, but...
Yeah, but still, so even if it's not like a stacks piece, it could just be something that's shutting down your strategy. Like, somebody might have a big, giant, scary creature, but if something else is preventing you from playing out your strategy, doesn't matter how big that creature is going to be, you can't develop out your board, or you can't develop out your strategy to win the game. So that is, like we said, threat assessment is assessing your ability to win the game.
We can mention that there are often forgotten threats on the table, and we'll be very, very brief with this. We'll simply mention Xantia. We mentioned her in a previous episode. She gets bounced around the table like crazy. It's hard to keep track of her.
Stuff like curses, where you curse somebody else, and in Magic nuance and minutia, it's on your board, but it goes to somebody else. You put it on their side of the board. Like, I'm cursing you, so here, I have this, and then it sits there, and then somebody might goad somebody's creature. Well, yeah, the creature might be coming at you, but it's the other guy who goaded it. So, like, that's who you really want to look at.
Oh, for sure. There's also Psychic Possession that is a very good value engine for the player who cast it, and these are all forgotten threats.
And then we have something that's in between, that's sort of this weird gray area of being a known threat and an unknown threat. And that's stuff like Morph. Things like Den Protector and Deathmyth Raptor, where, it's on the board, and you can see that it's a Morph card, but there's like 198 Morph cards in Magic, so it could be any number of things. You don't exactly know what it is until they flip it up, and it could be like this aha trap moment. So you have to be wary of whatever that morph might be. It could be completely innocuous, or it could be absolutely game ending.
Oh, for sure. And this kind of transitions into other unseen threats of the game. I think the biggest one, most important one we should talk about first is hand size. This threat cannot be understated. It is huge.
Oh yeah.
The more cards in hands, the more answers you have.
As a Simic player and somebody who likes to draw a million cards and spin his wheels, I played a game the other night, and I pretty much won the game and had my opponents concede to just raw value of everything in my hand and just everything on the board stage. Just having a bunch of cards in hand and just a little bit of untapped mana means that you have that many more opportunities to
cast removal, counter spells, everything.
Exactly.
There's also like another unseen threat in the hand, and that's a niche deck strategy, Madness cards.
Yeah, discarding stuff and then getting value off of it. Starting something that's typically a negative and flipping it on its head and making it a positive aspect because you're getting to cast these cards for their madness cost.
Yeah, and that kind of transitions into the graveyard. This is another way to have unseen threats on the table. They're reanimation targets, reclaim targets, flashback, delve, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of things to deal with the graveyard that just...
Stuff that's, even if they played it in like it's an instant or sorcery, it has flashback, so it could come back. It could be a problem later on. And then reanimation targets where, it might be 3 cards down in their graveyard, but hey, assess the situation, be like, hey, let me look at your graveyard. You go through it and you're like, if you see a Gravecrawler in a zombie player's deck, that's something to be careful of because, it just might be this little zombie that they can recast if they have a zombie on the field until it pairs with Phyrexian Arena, and then they're recasting it and draining you out with a Blood Artist.
Exactly, and that's just that's no fun for anybody.
Yeah, so definitely pay attention. Ask to see people's graveyards.
Yeah, the other thing that you can kind of take into consideration here is there are certain cards in the game like Gonti, Lord of Luxury, and
Foretell cards.
You have Foretell cards and Valky/Tibble that expand your hand size by putting stuff into exile.
Yeah, that's pretty much all of Red's impulsive draw at this point. We've seen recently that Prosper Tomebound has skyrocketed up to the top of the EDH rec list as the most popular Rakdos commander, and that's because he just gives you such incremental value that it's almost like you're not playing a Rakdos deck. You're almost playing a blue deck with like this access to great card advantage.
That's kind of stuff you got to watch out for in terms of threat assessment here. Hand sizes and graveyards and all this stuff.
So this is what I meant when I defined threat assessment. It's constantly updating your understanding of what's going on in the game. And that doesn't just mean the board state. That means everybody's hand size. That means their graveyard. If anything's in exile, it can maybe be recast. This is paying attention to what's happening in the game. And to get into the less technical definitions and getting more into the spirit of what we're doing and transitioning to the conceptual side of threat assessment. If you're sitting there playing a game and Chris has popped off, well, like, all right, Chris can kill us at any moment, so let's deal with Chris. And then that's easy to understand because, like, oh, you're popping off, you're clear to the threat. Where threat assessment gets really tricky and where you really want to have a conversation about how to navigate these elements is when everybody's at parity and you go, all right, everybody's in a Mexican standoff. We're like, all right, who's going to fire first? And you're all just glaring at each other like, is it you? Is it you? And, it's like that scene from The Good, Bad, and the Ugly.
Yeah. The other thing to kind of watch for in these situations is you may think everyone's at parity. There could be one guy who's a little behind. And often at the end of the game, the guy who was behind when you were assessing the big threats, they built up their board. They became the biggest threat, and you didn't even know they did it.
Yeah. And to flip that on its head, sometimes that's the correct move to make, is to fly under the radar. Because here's the thing. You're doing threat assessment, in real time as you play the game. But so are your opponents. You've got 3 other people there in an ideal, 4-player game. You've got 3 other people there that are scanning the board and assessing the situation there too. And if you can sit there under the radar and just slowly, quietly play out some of your not quite so scary stuff and just build up that incremental value, you can fly under that threat assessment radar. And then after 2 players have finished beating the ever-living shit out of each other because, one person popped off, somebody threat assessed, okay, I'm going to deal with you, and it turned into a blood feud, you can be like, all right, I'm going to sit here and just quietly hang out, and then once they're done with their blood feud and somebody's dead and the other person's at a low life total, you're in a position to take out the other 2 players.
Going back to commanders for a second here, like one thing you can kind of assess based on commanders is often the speed the deck wants to play at.
Exactly.
Red decks are typically very, very fast. They want to try and win as quick as possible. If you see a Earl the Miststalker deck, that's a Voltron deck. You're trying to kill someone as quick as possible, commander damage.
Exactly, and the chances of them playing instant speed stuff is a lot lower. It's not 0, but they're going to be playing like equipment and enchantments and stuff, and they're going to be playing it like sorcery speed.
Yeah, they may have a couple flash effects in there, but they're not really doing anything crazy here.
Yeah, those are the kind of decks you want to pay attention to on their turn. But if you sit down against a Gallows S Prismari deck, that deck is live all 4 turns.
I mean, going back to Urel, the Miststalker here for a second, the other thing to keep in mind with Voltron decks is they're really only scary in a very narrow window of time. If they can't kill you by about turn 5 or 6, and typically it's only one player they kill by turn 5 or 6, they're not going to win at all. If they do somehow win, it's because they politic their way out of that situation. And if that's the case, it's not the commander that's a threat, it's their politicking skills.
Yeah, and then that's another good example of when to do some threat assessment. If somebody's politicking super hard, maybe pay attention to why they're doing it. Maybe they might be the threat and they're just trying to weasel their way out of it.
That's exactly it. There's so many complicated board states here and game situations that you cannot 100% be aware of every threat at any given time, but politicking is one of your keys to figuring out who the threat actually is.
Yeah, it definitely can be. And it can also be one of your ways of dealing with a threat. You can be like, hey, man, I currently don't have anything to deal with this really scary thing. And you can explain how a certain piece on their board combos with other stuff and be like, hey, he could have that combo in his deck. And if this other element comes down, we're just fucked.
Yeah. How about we talk about the person in last place and how they can assess threats a little bit better, what strategies they should be utilizing a bit.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I think I want to start with the fact that if you're in last place and there is obviously a person clearly in first, your first priority should not be helping out, second and third place try and take out number 1.
This is where the radar situation, just flying under the radar and just hanging out. When you're in last place, that is the exact thing you want to do. You just want to fly under the radar and not be anybody's threat. And if anybody asks you for help, you're like, yeah, hey, look, guys, I'm on the back foot here. I'm getting kind of screwed. You just don't make yourself readily available to help deal with the threats.
Now, if they're getting pushy, you tell them, I will do my best to help you. I will help when I can.
Exactly.
It's a non-committal agreement to help. You're not really committing to it. You're kind of moving past it.
Exactly. I think these are all some really, fine points for threat assessment. I think that just about covers everything that we would want to talk about. What do you think, Chris?
Threat assessment's really important in the game, and so many people don't know how to do it. And I'll be honest, I make mistakes all the time with threat assessment.
Yeah, we all do. Everybody's done that. Or you just get sort of tunnel vision there and you find one threat, but the key point of threat assessment is to remove your emotions from the game and think logically and clearly about who can do what poses an existential threat to you. And by existential threat, I mean what is going to either kill you or prevent you from winning the game yourself.
Yeah.
That's the crux of threat assessment, is figuring out where your standing is within the race of the game and figuring out how you can position yourself to either just not die or to actually win.
Nailed it. I think that's good.
And with that, I'm 8.5 Daves.
And I'm Chris Tarl, Mustache Herder. Thanks for spending time with us.
And thanks for watching.
Hey, Dave.
What, Chris? Hey, what's up?
Which sea monster is the best at starting conversations?
Ooh, which sea monster is best at starting conversations?
The Icebreaker Kraken, of course.
Oh, good one.